so it sounded very loud. Welcome everybody to the work session today. Clerk, will you go ahead and I'm calling us to order, and then Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Bajent.
Here.
Clegg.
Here.
Halliburton.
Here.
Sanchez.
Here.
Thompson.
Here.
Woodings.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. First up is interim budget changes. Eric.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Members of the council, we have 4 interim budget changes for your consideration this afternoon. The first one is a funding reallocation to support the Vista Gateway Art public art project, utilizing Percent for Art funds. The second one is utilizing federal coronavirus relief funds to support 2 objectives in the Information Technology Department. First, remote equipment, and the second being conference room upgrades. Total relief funds for those 2 needs totaling approximately $1.7 million. The third item being a Foothills land acquisition, approximately 325 acres between Cartwright Road and Siemens Gulch Road, utilizing Foothills and open space levy funds. And the fourth item being the recognition of revenue from Republic Services utilizing CNG rebate, which is essentially a federal tax credit that that Republic Services received and has passed along to the city. Proposed use of those funds being repairs and maintenance of our geothermal system. Those are the 4 IBCs we have. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
hearing no questions, I would move that we approve the interim budget changes as presented.
Second.
A motion and second. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Sanchez.
Yes.
Thompson.
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
Clegg.
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. And next up, we have a presentation on the proposed housing bonus ordinance and update on zoning ordinance rewrite. Darren and Andrea, welcome. And yeah, just go ahead and take it. I'm excited for us to have this conversation both about the ordinance, the housing bonus ordinance, but also about the zoning ordinance rewrite that we put a pause on to make sure that we are covering the goals that we have and starting it in such a way that could engage the public. We get outcomes that we're looking for, and we are ready to move on. So welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll start off and talk in a very general way about the zoning ordinance. You and the council are both well familiar with where we're at in that process. And so I'll give you just a high-level rough overview on that and where we intend to go. Andrea will then take it and walk through in a little more detail about what we're hoping to do with the housing bonus ordinance. And I'd also point out that we have Maria Vieg with us to talk a little more in detail about public engagement should there be questions from the council on that. So next slide, please, Andrea. So the council and mayor will remember that the zoning ordinance rewrite is intended to update our existing ordinance to ensure future design and development of the city enables a more walkable, dynamic city for everyone. Essentially, the ordinance that we have was written in 1965. It's been amended many times, and it's resulted in an ordinance that is somewhat disjointed and difficult to use for both the public, the city staff, and then the elected officials as well. The new ordinance has the objectives of trying to simplify regulations and the development review process, to modernize the zone and development standards. And I would point out that we are looking to streamline the number of zoning designations that we have as well. At last count, I believe we had over 32 zones, which is a level of detail that just makes things difficult to use. And then we are really looking for ways to incentivize development that integrate various transportation modes and mixes of land uses at targeted growth locations throughout the city. I think you can think of that as getting the, accommodating growth in the right places with the right mix of services to serve the day-to-day needs of the people that are going to live in those areas. Next slide, please. So just by way of a timeline, you'll recall we started the process back in November of 2019. At that time, we stood up a citizens advisory committee that had 13 individuals on it, and we talked with approximately 56 people, I believe, about very high-level questions about their understanding of the existing zoning ordinance and sort of their aspirations for seeing the process move forward. In December of 19, we put the project on pause, really just to make sure that the ordinance as scoped and contracted was consistent with the policy objectives of the mayor's office. And so we began a detailed working sessions with you and your staff, Mayor. And out of that process came the idea to reconstruct the citywide advisory committee to be better representative of the city. And Andrea will talk a little bit more about how we intend to do that, or I will, maybe that's the next slide, sorry. Sorry, Councilmember Sanchez, did you have a question?
Yes, so I wanted to ask how the 50 plus people who were consulted, how were they selected to participate in this process?
They were basically, we just put I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Darren, and just to clarify, I want to make sure that it's understood that that was back in November. Yes, you have not consulted with 50 plus people currently, but that
That's
was
correct.
so just, yeah, I just want to make sure if that's the case that you flag that in your explanation.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Councilmember Sanchez. I should have clarified. We stood up the committee, and that was a committee of invitation of people who were deeply steeped in zoning law and land use process and procedures. The 56 people approximately that we talked to otherwise were general members of the committee. We put a call out for anyone who wanted to meet with us at that time. Our consultants came to town, and we did a citywide tour with the consultants, and then had 6 or 8 meetings with just a broadly representative group of committee or citizens that self-selected to come and talk to us about the zoning ordinance.
Thank you.
Yep. Next slide, please, Andrea. So with regard to the Citizen Advisory Committee, we have put a pause on the existing committee that we had, and we have a recruitment out for new members at this time. It's on the city's website and it is live. We're aiming to get a broad geographic representation across the city. In general, we're thinking that, or hoping that we'll get 2 representatives from each one of the city's 10 planning areas, thereby having 20 members on the committee, with an emphasis on underserved communities that aren't typically involved within the planning and zoning process. And then we, aim for this to be a very resident-centric process, and making sure that we identify concerns to people that live in throughout the city. Next slide, please. So our current direction at this time.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Darren, I'm sorry to keep interrupting you, but I just wanted to point out and thank you for being aware that we need to include people, not just from different geographic areas, but folks who are underrepresented. And I would love to consult with you and your team about how we can remove barriers for people to be able to participate fully. So I just would like to thank you, and also would like to offer some guidance on that.
Duly noted, and thank you for that, Council Member. Andrea is going to go into a little bit more detail about what the public engagement process is scoped to look like. And also Maria is here and may have some thoughts on that as well. And so we're definitely going into the process with that in mind. Moving forward from this point where we're at today, we will proceed with that 2 to 3 year zoning ordinance rewrite. The first 2 years there is very heavy on public engagement. It's very heavy on the technical aspects of writing a zoning ordinance. And at the end of 2 years, what we intend to have is a draft ordinance that we can then spend probably that next year taking out to the city at large and getting input for the mayor and council's consideration on what's being proposed by the staff and our consultants and the citizen advisory committee that we have. At the same time, in a concurrent process that we will start at the close of this meeting, basically, we will be drafting an ordinance to tackle that more urgent need for housing, and a particularly affordable housing citywide. And that process will move in parallel with the zoning ordinance. We have enlisted our consultants on the zoning ordinance to help us draft that ordinance. And then we will do the public engagement process in-house while the consultant continues to work on the broader zoning ordinance. And then finally, we'll of course continue to work with Housing and Community Development and the mayor's office, the council, and other stakeholders to implement the Grow Our Housing initiatives, and like the Housing Land Trust and the demolition ordinance and other things that are currently in process. So at this point, Andrea is going to take over. I'm going to mute and I'll hang out if there are other questions at the end. And Andrea can talk to you in more depth about what we're intending to do with the housing bonus ordinance. So thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Sure.
Andrea, instead of interrupting you, why don't I pipe in here? Darren, today you guys haven't, I know you've just been working this internally, but you haven't engaged the growth management team on the city council. So I just ask that we be engaged in this. I think we'll also have ideas on input about the applicants and the kinds of things we hope that we get in terms of an advisory committee broadly based in terms of policy as well as geography and underrepresentation. I know that's a tall order, but hopefully we can get there.
Duly noted. Thank you,
Yeah,
Council.
that's a great suggestion that we bring that there. I know that the two of you are on it, and maybe is there another council member as well that's on that committee? No, just, okay.
Yeah.
And you know, my belief is that the more work we do up front to get this right, the more likely it is that we'll be able to work with the community and get to a product that the community embraces. So.
Yeah, and Madam Mayor, although we don't have another official member, I've welcomed Councilmember Sanchez to participate in things so she can learn more about the zoning process. So, you know, we can figure that out as well.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I just wanted to follow up and say, if there is room for another member of that team, I would love to be a part of that.
Great.
Thank you.
Andrea, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. Andrea Tuning with our Planning and Development Division. We are here to discuss a little bit about some of those incentive zoning and that we can include within our housing bonus ordinance. Ultimately, we have some potential improvements the city could see, such as affordable or workforce housing, environmental conservation, anything from pathways to greenways, preservation of our public spaces, and even historic preservation as well. And the way that we can achieve that could be through offering particular incentives, looking at density bonuses, perhaps parking requirements, financial incentives like we have with the land trust, or even streamlined permitting to help save time for developers or individuals going through the process. So we're really looking at the flexibility of some of our zoning restrictions in exchange for some of those improvements and needs that the city currently has. And one of those largest needs that we've identified through a number of means is housing. And we are lacking affordable housing as well as housing at various price points. And so we would like to offer a housing bonus that would allow an individual to increase the density or the development that's allowed on our particular process in exchange for that benefit to us. And we have identified that we would look at that as really defining the purpose of providing that housing.
Andrea.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Andrea, we've got some network issues. I'm wondering if you would mind try and turn off your camera. There's a bit of a lag. So I don't know if, as long as you don't lose your slides, I'm not sure.
Let's see.
You were freezing up and then your voice was slowing.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah, let's try that. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So really, when we talk about the creation of the housing bonus ordinance, we would identify 3 major steps that we would go through. That would ultimately be defining the purpose of our housing bonus. And really, we have identified a number of items that we'd be looking for, providing the affordable housing as well as the mixture of housing product at various price points. Preservation of our existing affordable housing is critical, as well as adaptive reuse of existing buildings, historic preservation, contributing to the viability of our transit along our identified corridors, as well as conserving environmentally sensitive lands. Once we have our goal and our purpose, then we can identify where those bonuses are. And we have thought that we really want to make this impactful across the citywide, or the city, to make sure that the impact is felt citywide. So we have really specifically looked at regional activity centers and community activity centers where these possible bonuses could occur. And then we really want to move forward from identifying where those would be applicable and how that ordinance would then allow for us to create the bonus and make sure that it's an effective and viable option to us. So some of the housing bonus considerations that we have talked about, we talked about affordable housing, perhaps looking at how we can provide a bonus or a parking reduction that if somebody were to provide a number of units that serve incomes lower than 80% of area median income, locating them at those regional and activity centers so that we're getting parking reductions and housing exactly where we want people to be, near those goods and services, jobs, schools, parks, all of those services where we want them to be located. Really looking at quality design. So perhaps offering the ability to, rather than having to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission as well as the Design Review Committee, if somebody is willing to have a quality development that conforms to all of our standards that are identified within the design review standards and guidelines without any deviations, perhaps we can just move them to design review. If we can save them time, that oftentimes saves them money and allows for them to do a better product. We also have looked at preservation of historic structures. So if somebody is willing to preserve some type of historic structure, we could then offer them a housing bonus because they are willing to reuse that existing structure, which is a part of our fabric throughout the city.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, was that
Question.
Councilmember Thompson?
It is. Thank you. Andrea, on that piece, these other 4 factors really strike me as very important, and so is historic. But how do we define that? Because I know we have a historic district, so certainly it comes into mind when we're talking about the historic district. But other than that, how would we be able to determine what is historic and deserves some sort of bonus? Are we only talking about that district? Thank you.
Mayor McLean, Council Member Thompson, ultimately we would have to clearly define what that is. So if we want to say that you are in a historic overlay district and limit it to that, you certainly could, but you could also say, anything that might be on the historic registry. So in this particular case, when we reviewed the Travis apartments, that could have been applicable in that particular case, where if we said, no, we're willing to work with you. If you're willing to preserve this beautiful Art Deco building, we can offer you additional housing to be located behind that. So now we're maintaining that affordable housing and that historic structure, as well as providing additional housing for the developer as they move forward. So hopefully that gives you a good clarification of, how we can use that.
That does. Thank you. I turned off my screen. I'm kind of having bad internet. Thank you, Andrea.
Yeah, you bet. And then the final component that we'd be looking at is environmental conservation. So if we do have any identified sensitive lands, typically that would be the Boise River or the foothills, we could offer a housing bonus if somebody were to, for instance, provide an additional setback from the river or riparian area, or perhaps they cluster development in the foothills, so that we are preserving all of those things that we love in Boise and would like to preserve. So we do have some concurrent timelines that we have worked out. On this particular slide, we have it identified as fall of 2020, but we'll actually start that right here at the end of summer. So you'll probably see some activity occurring in August, and then our full kickoff. We have launched our official website that was launched last Friday. So we invite you to check that out. And we are currently underway for the selection of the citywide advisory committee as well. So we'll be recruiting 20 members to participate and engage as part of that. And then we'll also be working to develop our public engagement plan before we kick off and start our educational series and all our advisory committee meetings, as well as our public engagement process that'll move forward through 2021 and then 2022 as we enter into those modules. And then parallel to that zoning ordinance rewrite, what we are looking at is the housing bonus. Ultimately, that should address the immediate need that we have for affordable housing throughout the city. And so we'd be looking at drafting our ordinance in July and August, submitting that application, and then taking it out to the public and hearing what they have to say before we move on to the planning and zoning hearings, as well as the city council for final review and adoption at that time. But we will, through both of the zoning ordinance rewrite as well as the housing bonus, touch bases with all of the different facets of our community to make sure that they are participating where they can and they have the available tools to do that. So when we look at,
just a second, Andrea, Council President has something to say.
Great, thank you, Andrea. Just a couple of quick points on the housing ordinance changes, the density bonus and changes to get more housing built as soon as we can. I guess I have a couple of comments. One is that you didn't mention form or setbacks as some of the things that you might give on. And I think those might be really as important in some cases as parking. And I think we should make sure and look at that. The other two, your location criteria at activity centers, I think is a great idea, but I think there's perhaps an ability to expand that location criteria to also include some of our arterial corridors or even some of our collector intersections where single family housing may no longer be viable, and there might be a real opportunity to get some increased housing in those locations that's actually more beneficial to the existing neighborhood than perhaps a single family house that isn't working anymore as that. And then finally, I think we always need to be concerned about those who are at 80% of AMI and below, but I think we should also be concerned, especially coming out of this crisis that we're in right now with the economy, about folks who are making a working wage, but really not much above that. And those would typically be in the 80 to 120 AMI income level. And I think there's a fair number of those folks in our community who are having a difficult time finding housing and are being forced to move further away in order to continue to live in this valley. So I guess I'd hope that there's time and room to maybe expand the conversation about what is included in this ordinance. I'm willing to be part of that and willing to do it quickly. I know that we're on a quick timeline. I don't want to slow it down, but it'd be great if we could at least have a conversation about those extra things.
Oh, for sure. I really appreciate the feedback now. And I think it's important that as it's moving forward, that we do check-ins with council members, either through an official work session so the public can also hear it, But as you said, you've got ideas. My sense of the examples that Andrea gave were that they were examples. We're trying to figure out, what is best for the city and the public benefit, and what is the most likely to impact development in our community, so that we get the product that we know our residents need. And so if you've got suggestions, we want to hear that from the public, but we of course want to hear that from council as well in thinking through the puzzles.
Super. Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I would just like to, again, amplify what Council President Clegg just pointed out. One thing that we discovered in, the last recession that we had is a lot of the folks that Council President Clegg is referring to, and it's those people who I guess we would classify as the working poor, people who are doing everything they can to make ends meet, but they don't meet those low-income guidelines. They fall between the cracks. So it fills my heart with joy to hear a colleague point that out, that we need to make sure that we don't, that we are taking those folks into consideration as we move forward with this legislation. So thank you.
Great. All right, Andrea.
All right. Thank you, Mayor and Councilwoman Clegg and Sanchez. Councilmember Clegg, we are actually looking at form and setbacks, and those are that's the exact type of direction that we would like to hear from the council and our public as we move forward, is how we really can optimize our infrastructure, reducing that use of cars and creating opportunities for everybody to access transportation and have access to parks and open space, schools, those exact types of things, and really locating people in those ideal locations. So this is exactly what we're looking for. And as we move forward through the 6 to 9 month approach for the housing bonus ordinance, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and draft that ordinance for public comment. It'll probably be toward the beginning of August, but we will go ahead and start that at the end of July. And we'll make that ordinance available for everybody to provide comments like we've heard this evening, really with approachable language and making sure that everybody has the ability to provide comment through that public engagement process. And once we have all of that public engagement, we can then collect the survey and our email results to make amendments to what we initially may have drafted, so that the Planning and Zoning Commission then knows what we've heard in October and November. And then hopefully as we evolve, by the time we get to City Council in December or January, we're going to have a really high quality product that's going to make that lasting impact that we're looking for.
And Andrea, I believe that also in there, without slowing down the timing, in the public engagement and revision recommendations, a work session with council would be great, so that we can all hear back the public suggestions, and then council has an opportunity to weigh in to make sure that we didn't miss anything before it's headed with final text to planning and zoning.
Mayor McLean, we'd love to chat with you guys again, make sure we are on the right direction and that we're hearing from the right populations and that we're gathering all the information that we can.
Great, thanks.
And so really, once we get through that public adoption process, we're going to have a housing bonus ordinance that we're hoping that is truly effective. But as we move forward, we've talked about our website, which is currently live and it's out there currently. And we're now accepting those applications for the citywide advisory committee. And so that'll be happening throughout July. August 7th is our deadline for that. So we hope to have a selected committee by the end of August. And then really starting the initiation of the housing bonus ordinance. We've got quite a bit of work ahead of us, but we're excited and we can't wait to see where we go.
Great, thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you, Andrea. That was really, really illuminating, and it's so gratifying to see this coming forward, because I know so many of us were like, we want to do more, we want more to happen, but at the same time we're redoing the zoning ordinance, and so the timing didn't really make a lot of sense. to wrap it all together. So I really applaud Darren and your team for diving in and bringing us something that will get us one of the tools that we need as we move through the more comprehensive zoning ordinance. My question is actually for community engagement. And Councilmember Sanchez mentioned earlier that she and I think we all want a really diverse group of community members to serve in this capacity. I'm curious if CE has the internal capacity expertise to reach out to some of those marginalized communities and make sure that we're getting applicants from a variety of backgrounds.
Thank you, Council Pro Tem Whittings. We're pretty excited about this opportunity. It's our first opportunity to really start rethinking the way we're formatting our advisory committees for the city. So we want to look for, I think, as Darren mentioned, not just geographic diversity, diversity of income and background, and folks from communities that don't typically get engaged, but also a mix of existing and non-traditional knowledge. With the understanding that I think that we'll have some of the best working committees if we bring together stakeholders that already come to the table with specific knowledge about land use and zoning, but also folks who have the ability to maybe think about unintended consequences, or think about things with creative approaches or other kinds of non-traditional knowledge that we sometimes miss out on. So we're taking this as an opportunity to be really broad in our recruitment, not just to wait for folks to come to us through postings on social media. We are using our network of liaisons within the community with our partner organizations to really push this out and think proactively about trying to bring in a really diverse group of applicants. And frankly, if we're not seeing that come in, I think we'll double down on our efforts to do that.
That's great, thank you. And I know that there was a lot of that capacity that was being built through the Census Committee and through other things. And so it's great to see that that's been internalized within the city and that we're building that capacity going forward. So I appreciate that.
Madam.
Okay, I think I heard Councilmember Bajent, and then maybe, was it Councilmember Sanchez?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's a quick point and just an observation, but my observation and experience has been that people under the age of about 35 have very different ideas about how our city should grow and develop than people over the age of, say, 65. And so when we're looking at diverse points of view, different background, different experiences, I would encourage all of us to consider age as a very important metric in that, because that is, after all, who will be inheriting our city. So that's just my observation.
Thanks. Councilmember Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would also like to direct my comments to Maria. Thank you, Maria, for that information. And just to echo what Council Pro Tem Wooding said, I sincerely hope that we're using that list that we generated from the informal community leaders that we reached out to in working on the local complete count for the 2020 census. But again, I would love to offer my own expertise in helping to not just identify the folks in the community who would be good on this committee, but also identify ways that we can remove barriers, because there are a lot of folks in our community who are interested in this, but they either have transportation issues or childcare issues. So I would love to be a part of helping you identify ways we can make it possible for them to participate.
Thank you. All right, anyone else? Sounds like we're good here in chambers. Andrea, this was your last slide, correct?
It is.
All righty. Well, then I think we are good for now. Really look forward to seeing the next steps of both the rewrite and the housing bonus ordinance, and appreciate staff's work to move forward as quickly as we can on the bonus ordinance while we're doing the longer work of the zoning rewrite, just as the Council President Pro Tem pointed out. So with that, we're adjourned until our 6 o'clock schedule. As far as I understand, based on this agenda, we don't have an executive session, correct? All right, so we'll be back at 6. See you all on the Zoom at 6 o'clock.
Thank you, Mayor.